11 Golden Age stars who aged terribly. Number 5 is truly shocking. Hollywood's Golden Age made regular people look like gods and goddesses. They were beautiful, timeless, and out of reach. But time doesn't care how famous you are. Sometimes being famous actually makes aging worse in ways that surprise even the biggest fans. Today we're looking at 11 famous stars whose later years looked nothing like their glory days. Some looked decades older in just a few years. Others tried desperate things to stay young that went horribly wrong. And one star, number 5, changed so drastically and sadly that people who saw them couldn't believe what they were seeing. These weren't just regular aging stories. These were warnings written on faces that were once perfect. You've watched their classic movies. You've loved their talent and beauty. But what happened when the cameras turned off and time started taking over? What did these icons lose after all those years in the spotlight? And might their stories help us think differently about aging and death? Let's find out as we look at the shocking final years of Hollywood's biggest stars. Well, I'd take it out, put something else in. Yeah, sometimes I'd put extra things in that I knew they were going to take out. 1. Mae West, the woman who refused to age. Mae West made her name with her bold sexuality, curvy figure, and risque one-liners. Throughout the 1930s, she was one of Hollywood's most controversial and profitable stars. Her blonde curls, heavily lidded eyes, and signature pout created an instantly recognizable image. But unlike many stars who eventually accept the aging process, Mae West took the extraordinary position that she simply would not participate in it. As she moved into her 60s, 70s, and even 80s, West maintained exactly the same appearance she had created in her 30s. The platinum blonde hair, heavy makeup, revealing costumes, and seductive persona remained frozen in time. But as the years passed, this unchanging image took on an increasingly surreal quality. By the time she appeared in Myra Breckinridge in 1970 at age 77 and Sextet in 1978 at 85, the disconnect between West's age and her presentation had become extreme. Her hair, now a wig, remained in the exact same style she had worn decades earlier. Her makeup grew increasingly heavy. Thick layers of foundation, dramatic eyeliner, and bright lipstick applied well beyond her natural lip line. Most striking was her commitment to playing the same sexually charged characters she had portrayed in her youth. In Sextet, 85-year-old West was cast as a sex symbol desired by men a quarter her age, delivering lines about her insatiable appetite for romance while surrounded by muscular young actors. The visual effect was unsettling. Under harsh studio lights, the heavy makeup cracked and settled into the natural creases of age, creating a mask-like appearance. Her movements, once fluid and suggestive, had become stiff and careful. The famous walk, that swaying, hip-swinging strut, had transformed into a tentative shuffle, though she still attempted to perform it. Perhaps most telling were the production accommodations required for her final film. According to cast members from Sextet, West's eyesight had deteriorated so badly that she couldn't read her script. Her lines were fed to her through a hidden earpiece, resulting in odd pauses and disconnected delivery. Some scenes had to be shot in fragments because she couldn't physically manage longer takes. The stark contrast between West's carefully maintained image and the reality of her aging created something that audiences found difficult to watch. Critics were brutal. One described her final film appearance as like watching your grandmother perform a striptease. West remained defiant until the end, insisting in interviews that she still felt as young and desirable as ever. When asked about aging, she famously said, "I never worried about age. I don't feel like I will ever be an old woman. I'll always be a young woman who is aged." But the camera told a different story. Despite all her efforts, the wigs, the makeup, the carefully controlled lighting, time could not be completely denied. What emerged was neither the young Mae West nor a gracefully aged version, but something else entirely,
a strange theatrical approximation of youth that called more attention to her age than simply embracing it would have done. She didn't age. She refused, and it showed.
2. Edward G. Robinson, When the Tough Guy Crumbled. Edward G. Robinson built his career playing tough guys and gangsters, with Little Caesar establishing him as cinema's definitive mob boss. Despite his short height and unconventional looks, Robinson had a commanding presence, intense eyes, a forceful voice, and distinctive features that made him instantly recognizable. In his prime, Robinson's face was his fortune. Those heavy-lidded eyes, the prominent nose, the determined set of his jaw. He wasn't conventionally handsome, but his face had character, strength, and a unique kind of appeal that worked perfectly for his roles. But the aging process was particularly unkind to Robinson, made worse by both lifestyle choices and personal hardships. Robinson was a chain smoker, rarely seen without his trademark cigar both on and off screen. Decades of this habit left their mark on his skin, which started taking on a leathery, deeply creased appearance by his late 50s. The constant squinting through smoke further deepened the lines around his already heavy-lidded eyes. Then there was the matter of his health. Robinson suffered from chronic heart problems that required strong medications, many of which caused side effects, including fluid retention. This created a puffy, bloated appearance that became more pronounced in his later years. By the 1960s, Robinson's transformation was dramatic. His face, once so defined and expressive, had become noticeably swollen. His jowls sagged heavily, and pockets of fluid gathered under his eyes. His skin took on an unhealthy pale color with visible discoloration and age spots. Even his posture changed. The once straight stance that had made him seem taller than his 5'5" height now curved into a permanent hunch. The final blow came from emotional stress. Robinson faced political persecution during the McCarthy era and was forced to testify before the House Un-American Activities Committee. Though eventually cleared, the experience took a visible toll on him. Friends and colleagues noted that he seemed to age years in just months during this period. In his final films, including Soylent Green in 1973, the camera could not hide the extent of his physical decline. The man who had once dominated the screen with his energy and intensity now appeared fragile and exhausted. Makeup artists struggled to restore some of his former vigor, but the results often made him look artificially colored rather than healthy. Most poignant was a comment from director Richard Brooks, who had worked with Robinson in both his prime and his final years. After shooting a particularly difficult scene late in Robinson's career, Brooks reportedly remarked, "The face that launched 1,000 gangsters has run aground." By the end, even the gangster roles stopped calling.
3. Janet Leigh, Frozen in Fear. Janet Leigh screamed her way into cinema history in the shower scene from Hitchcock's Psycho, creating one of film's most lasting moments. In her prime, Leigh had fresh, natural beauty, the perfect combination of the girl next door and the glamorous movie star. Her heart-shaped face, bright eyes, and genuine smile made her instantly likable on screen. But as Janet aged, she made choices that would eventually turn her face into a cautionary tale for Hollywood actresses. Unlike some stars who aged naturally, Leigh became an early user of cosmetic procedures designed to keep her looking young. Starting in the late 1970s, when these techniques were still relatively new, she went through a series of treatments that would have long-term effects on her appearance. The problem wasn't just one procedure, it was the combination and timing. Facelifts done too close together, fillers injected before earlier ones had fully settled, and techniques that hadn't yet been perfected all contributed to a gradual change of her once natural features. By the 1980s, fans started noticing the changes. The Janet Leigh who appeared in films and TV guest spots looked noticeably different. Her skin appeared unnaturally tight across her cheekbones. Her eyes, once so expressive, now seemed permanently widened, creating an unintentional look of constant surprise or alarm.
When she smiled, her face moved in unusual ways, with some parts remaining oddly still while others shifted. The most visible change was in the texture and movement of her skin. The natural elasticity and subtle expressiveness that had made her so compelling on screen had been replaced by a smooth, waxy quality that reflected light differently under camera conditions. Directors who worked with her during this period noted the challenges of lighting her face, as the normal techniques used to highlight expressions no longer worked as expected. What made Lee's transformation particularly sad was that it seemed to visually reference her most famous role. With her wide, sometimes startled-looking eyes and tightly drawn skin, she started to resemble someone caught in a permanent state of alarm, not unlike Marion Crane's terror in that infamous shower. In one of her final major public appearances, at the 50th anniversary screening of Psycho in 2010, the contrast between the fresh-faced actress in the film and the woman on stage was striking. While still elegant and poised, her facial movements appeared restricted, her expressions limited to a narrow range. Her eyes screamed, but her face didn't move. I must say, it's a pleasure to be here.
4. Montgomery Clift. Beauty, shattered and reassembled. When Montgomery Clift arrived in Hollywood, his looks were so perfect they seemed almost unreal. With chiseled features, soulful eyes, and a sensitive manner, he represented a new kind of male beauty, less rugged than earlier stars, more vulnerable and complex. Alongside Marlon Brando and James Dean, he helped redefine masculinity on screen, bringing emotional depth and psychological complexity to his roles. Then came the night that split his life and his face in two. On May 12, 1956, after leaving a dinner party at Elizabeth Taylor's home, Clift's car slammed into a telephone pole. The accident shattered his face, breaking his nose and jaw, fracturing his sinuses, and leaving him with partial paralysis on the left side of his face. He needed extensive reconstructive surgery. And while doctors did their best, the Montgomery Clift who emerged was visibly different from the one audiences had fallen in love with. The right side of his face remained mostly as it had been, handsome, expressive, perfect. But the left side became partially frozen, with a slightly sunken appearance. His mouth sometimes drooped on one side. The symmetry that had made him so striking was gone forever. But the physical changes were only the beginning. To cope with the chronic pain from his injuries, Clift became dependent on alcohol and prescription painkillers. The combination made him age extremely fast. Within just a few years, he looked decades older. By the early 1960s, only in his early 40s, Clift appeared thin and worn out. The skin on his once perfect face had become pale and loose. Deep lines formed around his eyes and mouth. His body, once athletic and graceful, became thin and frail. He moved like an old man, with stiff, uncertain movements. In his final film, The Defector, in 1966, completed shortly before his death at age 45, Clift is almost unrecognizable from the beautiful young man who had starred in From Here to Eternity just 13 years earlier. His face appears sunken, with hollow cheeks and dark circles under his eyes. His skin has a grayish color. Even his voice, once so distinctive and compelling, sounds weak and strained. Fellow actors who worked with him in those final years described the experience as watching someone disappear before their eyes. Director John Huston, who had worked with Clift both before and after the accident, remarked that it was like directing two completely different actors. Elizabeth Taylor, one of his closest friends, described his decline as the longest disappearance in Hollywood history, a slow-motion self-destruction that played out on screen and in public for everyone to see. Let forever begin to lie.
5. Rita Hayworth, the unbelievable tragedy no one understood. In the 1940s, Rita Hayworth wasn't just famous, she was iconic. Her performance in Gilda created one of cinema's most memorable moments when she tossed back her gorgeous red hair and captivated audiences worldwide. During World War II, her pinup photo was pasted on more barracks walls and submarine torpedoes than any other star. Her beauty seemed almost otherworldly. Perfect features, flawless skin, and a smile that showed both innocence and seduction at the same time. But Rita Hayworth's final years would reveal a tragedy so deep that it changed how Hollywood and the public understand aging and illness. The first signs appeared in the 1960s when Hayworth was still in her 40s. Known for her lightning-quick ability to memorize dialogue and complex dance routines, she suddenly started struggling with her lines. Directors noticed she seemed confused on set, often needing multiple takes for simple scenes. Many people, including Rita herself, blamed these problems on alcohol, as she had developed a drinking habit over the years. But alcohol wasn't the real problem. By the early 1970s, Hayworth's appearance had changed dramatically. The graceful dancer who once moved with liquid precision now shuffled with an uncertain walk. Her famous face, once so animated and expressive, had taken on a permanently confused look, eyes vacant, mouth slightly slack. Her weight went up and down dramatically, and in public appearances she seemed disoriented, sometimes not recognizing longtime friends and colleagues. The most heartbreaking moment came during a 1976 film shoot where Hayworth repeatedly forgot her lines and appeared lost on a set filled with people she'd known for years. Production was eventually stopped. Crew members reported seeing the once greatest sex symbol in the world standing alone, disoriented in her dressing room, unable to recognize her own reflection in the mirror. What the public didn't know, what even Rita herself didn't understand, was that she was suffering from Alzheimer's disease decades before it became widely known. The diagnosis wouldn't come until 1980, making Hayworth one of the first public figures to put a face to this devastating illness. In her final public appearances, fans were shocked by what they saw. The legendary beauty was now bloated and messy, with haunted eyes that seemed constantly searching for something just out of reach. Her once perfect features were frozen in a mask-like expression. The famous Hayworth hair, those glorious red locks that had helped make her a star, hung limp and often unwashed as she could no longer manage her own basic care. The contrast between the vibrant star of CoverGirl and this confused, vulnerable woman was so extreme that many fans thought the photos must be fake or greatly exaggerated. But they weren't. This was the cruel reality of an illness that was stealing Rita's mind while leaving her body intact. By the time of her death in 1987, Rita Hayworth had spent nearly 2 decades in slow decline, unaware of her own legendary status, unable to recognize her family, and completely disconnected from the woman she had once been. The downfall was so shocking, people thought it was a hoax, but it was very real and heartbreaking.
6. Bette Davis. Those eyes watched everything fade. She had the most incredible eyes. That's what people always said about Bette Davis, and they were right. Throughout her prime, those famously intense eyes dominated her face, showing emotions from burning passion to murderous rage. Combined with her distinctive voice and fearless acting choices, Davis created an unforgettable screen presence that earned her 2 Academy Awards and a place among Hollywood's greatest legends. But the years were especially cruel to Bette Davis, turning her from a commanding presence to a frighteningly frail figure. The decline started with decades of chain smoking, up to 4 packs a day according to some accounts. The habit carved deep lines around her mouth and eyes, giving her a permanently severe look. Then came a series of strokes in the late 1970s and early 1980s. The first one in 1983 partially paralyzed one side of her face and slurred her once crisp speech. When Davis appeared on talk shows in her final years, audiences were often shocked by her appearance. Her once full face had become thin and skeletal, with skin that seemed paper thin and stretched too tight across prominent facial bones. Her famous posture, always so straight and proud, had curved into a permanent hunch. Even her hands, once so expressive in gestures, had become twisted and shaking. Most shocking was her major weight loss. In her final film, The Whales of August in 1987, Davis appeared almost ghost-like, a thin, frail shadow of her former self. Her costumes hung loosely on a frame that seemed barely strong enough to support them. Director Lindsay Anderson recalled having to shoot many takes because Davis lacked the physical strength to perform even simple movements consistently. Yet through it all, those famous eyes remained unchanged, still piercing, still intelligent, still unmistakably Bette Davis. They became even more prominent in her thinning face, creating an eerie contrast, the vibrant, fierce gaze of a legend looking out from the weathered face of a woman who had fought too many battles. Her eyes stayed fierce, but everything else faded fast. That's a mistake that will be corrected.
7. Orson Welles, the genius who expanded in all directions. In his youth, Orson Welles had a commanding presence. Tall, handsome, with piercing eyes and a powerful voice that could hold audiences spellbound. When he made Citizen Kane at age 25, he wasn't just a genius director. He was also a striking leading man with intense good looks and undeniable charm. But as Welles aged, his appearance went through one of Hollywood's most dramatic changes. His weight gain became legendary. The trim, handsome figure who had scared America with his War of the Worlds broadcast turned into a man of truly enormous size. By the 1970s, Welles had more than doubled his original weight. His once chiseled features disappeared into a face that seemed constantly expanding. His eyes, still piercing, now looked out from puffy, hooded lids. His jawline, once so defined, vanished completely. Even his voice, though still magnificent, became more labored as his breathing got heavier. Welles wasn't unaware of this change. He often made self-mocking jokes about his size, once saying, "My doctor told me to stop having intimate dinners for 4, unless there are 3 other people." But behind the humor were real health concerns and a major impact on his career. The weight gain, combined with decades of cigar smoking, heavy drinking, and chronic health problems, made Welles age too early. In his 60s, he walked with the slow steps of a man decades older. His skin developed a pale, unhealthy color, and he got exhausted after even small efforts. As his appearance changed, Welles became increasingly creative about hiding it. He started wearing large, flowing black capes and outfits that hid his size. In TV appearances, he would often sit behind desks or be filmed from the chest up. He grew a beard, partly to hide his multiple chins. In his later years, he even started using stage makeup in everyday life to give his pale skin some color. Perhaps most telling was the reaction when Welles died in 1985 at age 70. Many obituaries noted that he had lived a relatively short life, but few were surprised. Looking at photos from his final years, most people assumed he was much older than he actually was. By 60, he looked 85.
8. Gloria Graham, beauty destroyed by her own hand. Gloria Graham had one of the most distinctive faces of 1950s film noir. With her pouty lips and sultry stare, she represented the femme fatale in classics like The Big Heat and In a Lonely Place. Her unique beauty won her millions of fans and an Academy Award for The Bad and the Beautiful. But Graham had an obsession that would eventually destroy her looks. She was fixated on her upper lip, convinced it was too thin. This seemingly small insecurity would lead to one of Hollywood's most tragic beauty disasters. Starting in the mid-1950s, Graham went through a series of procedures to make her upper lip fuller.
But she didn't stick with normal methods. According to Hollywood legend, she started stuffing cotton or tissue under her upper lip to make it look fuller. Eventually, she turned to surgery, having fat from other parts of her body injected into her lip. The results were terrible. By the 1960s, Gloria's once subtle pout had turned into a permanently swollen, unnatural shape that distorted her whole face. The lip procedures left her with visible scars and an uneven appearance that makeup couldn't hide. What's worse, the tissue damage from these repeated procedures left her lip partially paralyzed. In her final film appearances, directors often filmed her in shadow or from certain angles to hide the visible damage. But in person, the change was shocking. Nicholas Ray, her ex-husband and director, purportedly didn't recognize her when they ran into each other years after their divorce. The final irony? Film historians now celebrate Graham's original look as one of the most captivating in cinema history. Her desperate attempt to fix what wasn't broken resulted in permanently changing the very feature that had made her famous. The surgery was supposed to help. It did the opposite.
9. Peter Lorre, the man who became his own shadow. Peter Lorre never fit Hollywood's typical definition of good looks. With his round face, bulging eyes, and soft voice, he made a career playing disturbing characters in films like M and Casablanca. But in his younger years, there was still something interesting about how he looked, an intensity, a presence that grabbed attention despite his small size. As years went by, however, Lorre's unique features started changing into something truly disturbing. A mix of ongoing health problems, morphine addiction, which started after a serious back injury, and heavy drinking made him age extremely fast. By the 1960s, Lorre had become a shadow of himself, literally. His once round face had caved inward, with sunken cheeks and dark hollows under his eyes that made him look like a skeleton. His naturally pale skin had taken on a sickly, almost gray color, and those famous eyes, once just unsettling, now seemed to bulge even more from his thinning face, making him look like a man constantly shocked or scared. In his final movie roles, makeup artists actually had to work to make him look healthier instead of more sinister. The change was so complete that when Vincent Price viewed Lorre's body at his funeral in 1964, he reportedly said, "He looked so much better dead than alive." It wasn't meant to be cruel, but a sad comment on how much suffering had been carved into every line of Peter Lorre's face in his final years. Time didn't take him gently. It dragged him down.
10. Betty Hutton, the blonde bombshell who disappeared. In the 1940s, Betty Hutton lit up the screen with incredible energy that few could match. Known as the blonde bombshell, her performances in classics like The Miracle of Morgan's Creek and Andy Get Your Gun showed off her special mix of comedy, singing, and dancing. Her face glowed with wholesome American beauty. Those perfect features, that million-dollar smile, those emotional eyes that could show joy one second and sadness the next. But the same intensity that made Betty a star would eventually help destroy her. Behind the scenes, she was fighting severe depression and addiction to prescription pills. The pressure to keep up her image and career pushed her to her breaking point. By the late 1950s, Betty's stardom had started fading, and so had her famous looks. A series of personal and work problems, failed marriages, career disappointments, money troubles, took a terrible toll on how she looked. But the most shocking change came in the 1970s after she had mostly disappeared from public view. When Betty showed up years later, even devoted fans had trouble recognizing her. Multiple nervous breakdowns had left visible damage on her once glowing face. A series of bad cosmetic procedures, desperate tries to get back her youthful look, had actually made her age faster. Her features, once so perfectly balanced, now looked distorted and unnatural. In one rare TV interview from 1974, the camera caught Betty in harsh, cruel lighting. The difference between this tired, stressed-looking woman and the vibrant star of just 20 years before was shocking. Her skin looked paper-thin and pulled tight. Her eyes, once so expressive, now looked permanently surprised, the unfortunate result of surgery that went too far.
Most tragic was Betty's own awareness of her change. "I don't look in mirrors anymore," she admitted in one of her last interviews. "The person I see there isn't me. It's not the Betty people remember, and it's not the Betty I want to remember either." She didn't just age, she disappeared behind a mask.
11. Mickey Rooney, from boy wonder to worn-out veteran. Mickey Rooney started as America's favorite teenager. Those bright eyes, that endless energy, that young charm. For millions of people, he represented pure, youthful spirit. Movies like Boys Town and the Angie Hardy series made him Hollywood's biggest box office star by the early 1940s. He made $150,000 per film. Incredible money back then. But under that happy surface, Rooney was living a wild life. Most people didn't know that behind those innocent characters, Mickey was burning out fast. While the public saw the clean-cut boy next door, Hollywood insiders watched his growing problems with drinking, gambling, and women. And these problems would catch up with him quickly. By his early 50s, when many stars were still at their best, Mickey Rooney looked way older than he actually was. His face, once so lively and young, had become puffy and droopy. The sparkle in his eyes had faded, replaced by the tired look of someone who had been through too much too soon. What happened? 8 failed marriages definitely didn't help. Each divorce cost him money and emotional pain. His gambling problem left him broke many times. But the real problem was the constant stress of trying to stay famous after his youth had gone. In one sad TV appearance in the 1970s, audiences were shocked when Rooney walked on stage. The man who had once been America's teenager now looked like he could be his own grandfather. His skin hung loose, with deep early wrinkles. His once fit body had become soft and round. The sad truth? Mickey Rooney lived to the amazing age of 93, but he spent more than half his life looking way older than he was. From teenage heartthrob to worn-out grandpa in record time.
These 11 stories aren't just about aging. They're about the hidden costs of fame, the impossible standards of Hollywood, and the deeply human struggle against time itself. Some of these stars fought aging with everything they had, only to make things worse. Others were victims of illness, addiction, or the relentless pressure of staying relevant in an industry that worships youth. What's most striking is how differently each person handled their decline. Mae West refused to acknowledge it. Rita Hayworth couldn't even understand what was happening to her. Montgomery Clift tried to numb the pain. Betty Davis kept working through it all, those fierce eyes never surrendering even as everything else faded. Their transformations shocked the world, but they also taught us something important. Beauty is temporary, fame is fleeting, and time comes for everyone, even the gods and goddesses of Hollywood's golden age. These weren't just celebrities losing their looks. These were real people facing mortality in the most public way possible, with cameras documenting every change, every line, every sign of decline. Their stories remind us that behind the glamour and the spotlights were vulnerable human beings dealing with pain, insecurity, illness, and the universal fear of being forgotten. Maybe that's what makes these transformations so shocking. Not just the physical changes, but the reminder that even the most beautiful, talented, and famous among us can't escape the passage of time. Now I want to hear from you. Which of these transformations shocked you the most? And do you think Hollywood has learned anything from these cautionary tales? Drop your answer in the comments below. I read every single one.